Welcome back to our class. And this is Psych 1, Introduction to Psychology 1HH96. And this is the third week of our class. And in this week, we are going to talk about the content covered in the chapter 3 of the textbook, which is about biopsychology. So actually, biopsychology is a very big branch of psychology that we just talked about last week. And biopsychology is one of the branches. There are other branches such as social psychology, developmental psychology, cognitive psychology. And first of all, we in this class, we are going to talk about biopsychology first. And then in the following a few weeks, we are going to talk about cognitive psychology. And in this week, we are going to talk about the neural system and also the endocrine system. And those systems are the parts in our physical body. So everybody has neurons and brains and those glands that secrete hormones. Actually, those parts are the biological basis of our minds and behaviors. So we can talk, we can think, we can work out a solution to a mathematical problem. We can act based on the rules. If we play games, we can use the rules to play the game and be a winner. And we can have feelings. We can receive the information from outside of the environment. For example, we can see things, we can hear things, we can we can touch things and have feelings. And also we can talk, we can move, we can act, we can influence other people. So how does this happen? How do all these processes happen? How is that possible? There is a biological basis of all those kinds of actions and phenomena inside our minds. So this week, we're going to talk about the very basic information about this kind of a biological basis of psychology. So let's start the lecture right now. So first of all, let's talk about the nervous system. So their nervous system is a very important system inside our physical body. And there are also other systems such as digestion system, including the mouth, the teeth, the intestines and the stomachs, and so forth. That's for digestion. And also there's the blood system. There are all kinds of blood vessels inside our body, and there is blood inside of blood vessels. So nervous system is another system that is very important. That is the system for processing information. So because we are humans, humans have a very important feature is that we are active, we are proactive. We are not just things in the environment, right? So we are not stones or we are not even computers. We have the proactivity, means that we can do things, we can think based on our own volition. If we want to do something, we can do it. So that feature of human relies on the nervous system, because the nervous system can receive and carry information, and also nervous system can process information and have some kind of outputs. For example, we can move, we can talk. So those are the outputs. So those kind of things rely on the nervous system. And in the nervous system, the basic units is called a neuron. So one neuron is one unit in the nervous system. So the nervous system is basically composed of a lot of neurons. So the neuron is the central building block of the nervous system. Actually, neuron is a very specialized type of the cell. So after learning biology before, we all know that our physical body is composed of different kinds of cells, right? So there are blood cells, there are muscles. In the muscles, there are muscle cells. In the skin, there's cells that compose of skin. There are the cell that is fat. So there's fat, there's muscle, there's skin, and there's bone. So inside the bone, there are also muscle cells. And even, yeah, so all kinds of building blocks of our physical body are actually all different kinds of cells. And the neuron is very specialized type of cell. So it's very interesting. Usually a normal cell, a regular cell inside of a body can regenerate itself. It means that it can produce another cell, a totally new cell, just by itself. So one cell can be divided into two cells, and two cells can be divided into four cells, and so forth. So it regenerates itself. But neurons cannot. When we are born with a certain amount of neurons, and that's it. Those neurons don't regenerate themselves. And on the contrary, they even have fewer cells, have fewer neurons when we grow up. So that's a very interesting phenomenon. So neurons actually are very valuable to everybody because the amount of neurons will not be higher. Sometimes it's lower because of the growing process, sometimes because of the percussion, sometimes because there are some kind of a physical injury and the brain is damaged. So some neurons are lost, but it doesn't regenerate. So if somebody loses some parts of the brain, it loses forever. And also the neurons are very interesting is that the neurons cannot live by themselves. Usually a regular cell can suck the nutrition from the blood. So why there's blood inside our body? Because in the blood, there is nutrition, there is oxygen. So oxygen and nutrition are inside the blood, and every cell in the physical body actually absorb the oxygen and the other kinds of nutrition from the blood. But neurons cannot do that because neurons are so specialized. It's just for processing and conveying information. So how do they live? Because neurons also need oxygen and all kinds of nutrition. So inside of the nervous system, there's other kind of neurons, other kind of cells. It's called glial cells. So it's written here. It's called glial cells. So glial actually coming from the Spanish word glue. So glial actually means glue, like a Spanish type version of glue. So glial cells can do the all supportive and protective job for the neurons. And the glial cells can protect the neurons because glial cells actually cover the neurons and also provide the nutrition, such as oxygen and other kinds of nutrition to the neurons and maintain the homeostasis. So glial cells actually do the work of guards and also the supporters, they're like the parents and the guardians of neurons. So they gave the nutrition to the neurons, so neurons can live. Neurons cannot live by themselves, and also glia need to protect the neurons, physically protect the neurons, so that neurons cannot be hurt too harshly. And also glial cells need to provide a good environment in which neurons can live well. For example, need to maintain a certain temperature or maintain a certain level of other kind of conditions so that neurons can live well and work well. So neurons and glial cells actually have their own jobs and the roles to compose of the nervous system, so the nervous system can be working well. So that's the basic biological basis of the nervous system. And there's one thing that that is very interesting to know about. That is about the very famous scientist Albert Einstein. So Albert Einstein has passed away, and I think everybody knows him. He's a Jewish scientist coming from Germany, and later he moved to the United States because of the Nazi Germany, and he discovered the theory that tells us the mass and energy can be transferred interchangeably, and also other very groundbreaking theories in physics. So he is very, very smart, and his IQ is like more than 200. And he is so good at mathematics and physics. So when he was a child, he can solve the mathematical questions very easily, much better than his dad and his uncle. So his dad and his uncle were also very interested in mathematics, oftentimes do some kind of math questions. And little Albert Einstein can solve those questions very easily. So they are very shocked by this little child. And when he grew up, and he become very important physicist, and mentioned a lot of theories about how the universe is working. So why he was so smart. And later, when he passed away, somebody got his brain, and analyzed his brain, and found that before that, and other people think that maybe there are more neurons inside of Albert Einstein's brain. But after analyzing his brain, they found that the amount of neurons are the same with other people's. But the glial cells, amount of glial cells, are the 3 times of a regular person's glial cells. What does that mean? It means that there are much more glial cells inside of Albert Einstein's brain than other people's. So the neurons are the same, but the glial cells there are more glial cells. It means that the glial cells can provide more nutrition to the neurons. So the neurons are working, or when we are thinking intensively, we are really working hard to think about something. The neurons are working intensively, so they need more nutrition to support that kind of working. So they need more oxygens at a very short time and other kinds of nutrition. So if there are more glial cells, neurons can get more nutrition and oxygens when they are working. So that's why Albert Einstein is so smart, because he has had more glial cells. He can be way more smarter than other people. So that's the very interesting fact to know about. And from that story, you can know that why somebody is smarter. Probably not because there are more neurons, probably because there are more glial cells. And glial cells are very important for the neurons and for the whole nervous system. So let's go to the neurons. So let's know about neurons. So neurons, we know that it's a cell. It's very specialized type of cell. So you can see that there's a core inside of the neuron. So because every cell has a core, so if you have learned biology, you know that every cell has a core. Inside the core, there's a lot of stuff like DNA and RNA and other stuff. And the shape of this neuron is very strange. So usually a regular cell, like a blood cell, it's like a round shape. It's like a ball. It's like sometimes a football, or it's just like a basketball or a football. And inside there is a core inside. This is look like a very, yeah. So my drawing is not good enough. So it's like a blood cell or other kinds of cells. The shape of the cells is like that. But the neuron is it's like a tree or some kinds of very strange I don't know. So it's very strange shape. So it has a reason for why the shape is like that. So let's see. You can see there are different parts. There's very long stripe here inside of the neuron. It's called axon. It's called axon. So this part is a axon. And here's a cell body or core. It's called soma. And also, you can see these tiny parts here, these little branches. So it's like branches of trees. This part is called dendrite. Dendrites, or one branch is one dendrite. Dendrites. And also on the other side, also some branches. It's called a terminal button or terminal buttons. And also you can see the green part here. It's not actually the neuron itself. It's the glia cell. So this is actually glia cell. Has different shape. You can see glia cells have also very strange shapes because it need to protect the neuron. And this part, you can see the cover here. It's outside of the axon. There's a cover that protects the axon. It's called a mating sheath. It's part of the glia cell, and you can see here is actually the core or cell body of the glia cell, and it contains a lot of mating sheath to protect the axon. So it's called a mating sheath. It's like a cover outside of the axon. So what do they do? What do all these parts do? And also, okay, the surface of the neuron is called the cell membrane. So it's here, it's cell membrane. So it's like surface of the neuron. So the cell membrane is very important for one neuron to function well. So cell membrane is just the surface of a neuron. And the dendrites, just the branches that are near the cell body. Those little branches are dendrites. Dendrites can kind of receive the information from other neurons. Actually, in the nervous system or in the brain, the neurons are interconnected. So the neurons do not live alone. So they work well because they are connected. The neurons cannot work alone. They need to work together. They need to connect each other to work well. So dendrites actually receive the information from other neurons. And the information is conveyed inside of the cell body, specifically through the axon. So that's why the axon is like a stripe. From from the dendrite, and information goes to the axon, and information goes to the terminal buttons. So axon is a pathway that information passes from dendrites to the terminal buttons, and the terminal buttons send information to the next neuron. So the job of one neuron is receive information, pass information, and send this information to another neuron. Every neuron is like a bridge. It's like a pathway, but this pathway is not infinitely long. It's like it has a specific length. And one neuron can be very long, can be very, very long, and it's like longer than you can imagine. So it's very specialized specialized type of cell. Actually, a cell is very tiny. You can see it. You cannot see it with the eye. But the neuron can be very. It's also very tiny, but it's also very long. So the basic job of a neuron is to convey the information from the last neuron to the next neuron. And a lot of the neurons compose of the nervous system. So the nervous system working that way. There are all kinds of information conveying inside of the nervous system. So the next question is, how exactly the information is conveyed inside of the neuron? How the information is conveyed along the axon? And another question is, what exactly the information is? What kind of information is that? So information can take in different forms. And inside of a neuron, the information is actually some kind of electric signal. It's actually electric signal. It's like very like the CPU of a computer. It's very interesting, like why we can create a computer, why we can design a CPU. Actually, CPU is very like nervous system of human. Inside of the CPU, there are different pathways that convey the electrical signals so that the computer can calculating things, thinking. But inside of a neuron, it's actually an electrical signal inside the neuron. So this information from another neuron send information to this cell. For example, to send the information to this cell. And the information tends to an electrical signal. And this signal just pass along the axon or the cell itself and send information to another neuron in the terminal buttons. So that's very interesting. Inside our body, actually, the electrical signals are working well. And let's see how exactly it's working. So right here is a little bit complex. If you cannot get it or I don't explain well, and it's okay. You can take some time to try to understand this, or you don't have to because it's not really covered in the exam. So you can see that here is a graph that shows the environment inside and outside of the neuron. So you can see the blue part here is the environment that is outside of the neuron. So outside of the neuron, there is also the fluid. So actually, every neuron is synced in the fluid. It's not really in the air, but in the fluid. Inside the neuron, there is also fluid. So it's like intracellular fluid. So intracellular means inside the cell. So intracellular fluid is inside of neuron, and outside the neuron, the neuron is synced in in the extracellular fluid, so outside of the cell fluid. And you can see the environment when there is no signal inside of the neuron is a little bit negatively charged. So the net charge is negative, and the outside of the neuron, the net charge is positive. So that's the basic environment when there is no signal, no information going on. And you can see outside of the neuron, and you can see here is the membrane, this part. That's the surface of the neuron. So outside of the neuron, there are some kind of chemicals such as sodium ions. It's a little bit positively charged, and there's chloride ions. It's negatively charged. So you can see the yellow circle here is represents the chloride ions, negative chloride ions, and you can see here that's the sodium ions that's positive charged. And inside of the cell, inside of a neuron, in the intracellular fluid, and there is a potassium ion that's also positively charged. And also there is some kind of negatively charged protons. So there are some kind of protons. So you can see there's a lot of molecules inside and outside the neuron. And also you can see on the surface of the neuron, on the membrane, cell membrane, there is this structure. It's like a gate. It's called a sodium gate. Usually it's closed. It means that the molecules inside and outside of the neurons cannot go to the other side. They are locked. It's locked. The gate is locked. So that's the environment when there is no information that need to be conveyed by the neuron. So when the information goes to this neuron through the dendrite, what happens? When the cell membrane gets the signal, the sodium gates are open. So the sodium gates will be open when it gets the signal from the other neuron. What happened then? The sodium ion come into the cell. Sodium ions come into the cell, and the internal charge becomes more positive. So usually it's negative charge, but right here, because there are more sodium positively charged ions, so the net charge becomes more positive inside of the neuron. And it becomes more and more and positive. And then there is a threshold of excitation. It means that when it's positive enough, the neuron will be active. There is a threshold. When the neuron is active, the action potential starts. There is a change. It's called an action potential inside of the neuron. Action potential starts. And what happened? The next sodium gates on the membrane will be open because action potential starts. So actually, this gate is open, and then a next gate next to it will be open, and that gate is open. The result is that the next gate will be open. The third gate will be open. So you can see there is a series of reactions happening here. And more and more and more gates will be open. So the action potential is conveyed from the first gate to the next gate, and to the third gate, and to the fourth gate, and so forth. So when the action potential is moving through different gates, the former gates that were open before, they get closed. And the potassium gates are open. And the potassium molecules, potassium ions move out. So you can see that the net charge inside of the neuron become less positive, which means that this environment gets to the original state, which is the resting potential, becomes normal. So when the signal is gone, the environment becomes normal. So that's how exactly why the neuron can convey information. Actually, the nature of this kind of information inside of a neuron is actually the action potential. Why there is action potential? Because some sodium gates in the membrane, in the cell membrane, are open. It's like a chain of events. One gate is open, and the next gate is open, and then the next gate is open, and then the next gate is open. And gradually, some other, like the gates used to be open, and now they are closed. So it returned to the normal state. So that's why the information can convey from this dendrites to here and to here, because on the surface of these parts, there are different kinds of sodium gates. You can see, you can imagine there are tons of sodium gates on the surface of the membrane. The first gate is open now, and the next gate is open, and then the third gate is open, and the fourth gate is open, and so on. So information can convey from this direction to this direction. And finally, it reaches the terminal buttons, and terminal buttons send information to another neuron. So that's how it works. So I think the physical body itself is so, the design of it is so delicate, or the arrangement of the physical body is so delicate. So it uses all these ions and these chemicals to do its job. So actually, humans' design of the computer or CPU are actually get inspirations from the neural system, the nervous system of humans. And the next question is how the information is conveyed between two neurons. So we just talk about how it's conveyed inside of a neuron. It's like through the electrical signal or the action potentials. But how the information is conveyed between two neurons, how one neuron sends information to another neuron. So you can see here on this graph here, you can see that's the this part is actually the terminal button, one terminal button of a neuron. And this part is the dendrite of the next neuron. So actually, dendrites receive information. The terminal button sends the information. So actually, the dendrite of one neuron is connected to the terminal button of the last neuron, another neuron. So that's how it works. But it's not actually touched. They are not touched. There is a very small space between the two neurons here. It's called the synapse. It's a very tiny gap between two neurons. So what happened in this gap, in this synapse? So when the action potential or the electric signal gets here, gets to the terminal button, the terminal button will create some kind of a neurotransmitter. It's a chemical. So every neurotransmitter is a chemical. It will create a lot of neurotransmitters, and the neurotransmitters are formed in the terminal buttons. And then the terminal button will send these neurotransmitters to the synapse. So release the neurotransmitters to the space, to the synapse. And they're free. They are not captured. They are not inside of the terminal buttons anymore. And they're free inside of the synapse. Synapse is actually outside of any neurons. And on the other side, on the dendrite of another neuron, there are a lot of proteins that are attached, are on the surface of that dendrite. There are some proteins. So those proteins are called receptors. So the role of these proteins is to receive the neurotransmitters. So that's why they are called receptors. They receive neurotransmitters. So they capture these neurotransmitters in the synapse. So the terminal buttons release the neurotransmitters into the synapse, and then these receptors catch or get the neurotransmitters. And when they get the neurotransmitters, they get a signal, right? So they get a signal. They found, oh, there's a signal here. So they will, in the dendrites, will start action potential. So the information will be sent in this way. So it's like at once they get these neurotransmitters, the neurons will fire or start the process of action potential. The sodium gates will be open around this area and around this area and convey through the axon. So you can see that the information conveyed between the neurons is actually a chemical process instead of electrical process. Inside the neuron, that's the electrical process because there is electrical signal passing along the neuron, inside the neuron. But between the neurons, it's like a chemical that it conveys the information. And then the chemicals travel from one neuron to another neuron. So the picture on the right is actually these are neurotransmitters. So you can see here this green node is a terminal button. So it's why it's called terminal button. It's like a button. So here, this part, these blue parts, these are neurotransmitters. They are tiny, lovely and shape of neurotransmitters. So these neurotransmitters will be released into the synapse, and some other neurons will get these neurotransmitters. So synapse is very small, tiny space between two neurons. So there are different kinds of neurotransmitters are released into synapse and captured by the receptors of another neuron. Receptors are, the nature of these receptors are the proteins on the surface of the neuron. They have different shapes because those different shapes actually capture different kinds of neurotransmitters. And so every receptor is specialized, is created for capturing a specific type of neurotransmitters. So so one receptor cannot capture all the neurotransmitters because they have different shapes. It's like a lock and a key relationship. So one key opens one lock, right? So this key cannot open all the locks. So one lock cannot be opened by all keys. So one key opens one lock. So there's a matching system here. So when or why the neurotransmitters are released? So as I just said, when the terminal button gets the signal, gets the actual signal from the other parts of the neuron, and they just get, they just release the neurotransmitters. And another question is, what happens after this process? So neurotransmitters are released into the synapse and captured by the receptors. And what happens next? So the open, so it becomes a electrical signal. The sodium gates are open in the next neuron, and then another process called reuptake also happens. So once the signal is delivered, there are too many neurotransmitters in the synapse, because they released a lot of synapse a lot of neurotransmitters, the transmitters in the synapse. So there are too many neurotransmitters in the synapse. They drift away. It means that they are broken down into inactive fragments. So they're just to become other things. They're not neurotransmitters anymore. They're broken into some kind of elements that are not really active. And then those elements or those inactive fragments are reabsorbed. They're eaten or absorbed by the terminal button, because terminal buttons need those neurotransmitters to work for many times for the entire life. So they release neurotransmitters, but they need to recollect them. Release neurotransmitters, recollect them. That's how it works. So neurotransmitters are not created infinitely. They need those in fragments to create new neurotransmitters and release them. Okay, so that's how it works. So that's the connection between two neurons. That's how information is conveyed between two neurons. And there's some interesting question about nervous system. So how many neurons are in our brain? So brain is on the top of the head. So how many neurons are there in total? Around 100 billion neurons. So the amount of neuron is like about 100 billion inside of everyone's brain. The number may be different based on different people, but scientists cannot count each neuron one by one. That's not really possible, but we can give an estimate. Probably more than 100 billion. Probably less than that number, but about 100 billion. Nobody can be sure that how many exactly neurons are there. And next question is, because neurons are interconnected, one neuron needs to connect to at least one another neuron. And sometimes the case is that one neuron connects to a lot of neurons, a lot of other neurons, and every neuron connects to a lot of other neurons. And so it forms a network. It's like all the neurons are interconnected. How many connections among neurons are there in the brain? So solely the amount of neurons are about 100 billion, and every neuron connects to a lot of neurons. So every neuron has a lot of connections. So how many connections are in total out there inside of a brain? That's a very interesting question. Over 100 trillion. So you can see the number here. I don't know how to read this number, but you can see it. It's like so many zeros here. More than 14 zeros in this number. Yeah, that's the amount of the connections are in the brain. So those connections support our thinking, support our brain to process all kinds of information and give responses to those to those information. So that's why humans are so smart, much smarter than other animals. Of course, other animals are also very smart, like other mammals, like dog, cats, uh, wild animals such as bears, and a lot of birds, like and other animals in the ocean, like dolphins, the whales. So those animals are already so smart. They have a lot of because they have brain, and inside the brain there are so many connections, like a human's nervous system. But human's nervous system is the most intelligent nervous system. Humans are the most intelligent because we have bigger brains. Our brains can do a lot of jobs, relying on these neurons and these connections among the neurons. So let's go to another part. Yeah, the neurotransmitters there are different types. I just said the different receptors catch different kinds of neurotransmitters, and different types of neurotransmitters are responsible for different jobs. So here's a table which is also on the textbook. You can read it, but I gave some examples. For example, one type of neurotransmitter is called dopamine. It creates happiness. It make you happy, make you really high, and make you feel good. So that's the role of dopamine. Helps adjust the mood. When you are sad, and then when you get more dopamine, you are not that sad again, and you're happier. And the sleep, dopamine, like actually, I think it doesn't help us to sleep well because dopamine make us to be very active, very excited, very happy. And it helps learning, I think, because when we are happy, we can learn better because it increases pleasure and suppress the appetite. And also another one is called serotonin here. Serotonin is kind of a chemical, like a neurotransmitter. It helps us to fall into sleep. Serotonin is very important. Help us to calm down and help us to fall asleep. So when we get a lot of serotonin in our brain, we yawn and we feel very sleepy. And a minute ago, I feel no sleepiness, but a minute later, I feel so sleepy. That's why, because inside my brain, there is a lot of serotonin released inside of the brain. And also there is this neurotransmitter is called norepinephrine. When we are stressed or when we have a lot of face the threat, the physical threat, for example, in a situation that is very dangerous, we must run away, we must escape. So we get a lot of stress inside the body. So at this moment, this kind of a hormone or a neurotransmitter, norepinephrine, is released a lot. And the role of this kind of a neurotransmitter is to increase the arousal, make us very alert, very alertive, or very aroused, very vigilant. Help us to increase the heart rate, to suppress the digestion, make us to have to be more vigilant so that we can run away very well. So these are the three examples of these transmitters. And next we can talk about a little bit about the drug. So the drugs are some chemicals. So drugs themselves are chemicals. Those chemicals, drugs, influence the nervous system. by mimicking some kind of neurotransmitters. So neurotransmitters are chemicals. Drugs are also chemicals. Sometimes the neurons cannot tell the difference between drug and neurotransmitter. So in other words, sometimes the receptors or neurons just take those drugs as if they are neurotransmitters. So they cannot tell the difference because they are just neurons. So there are two kinds of drugs. One kind is called agonists. There are other kind called antagonists. So agonists are chemicals that mimic neurotransmitters and strengthen the effects. So an agonist can strengthen the effect. Antagonists are also other kinds of drugs, blocks or impedes the normal activity of a neurotransmitter. So they decrease the effect. So an agonists strengthen the effect. Antagonists decrease the effect. So no matter what it is, the drugs influence normal activity of the nervous system. So when the dopamine is released, we are so happy, we are so excited and active. But there are some kind of drugs that mimic dopamine, for example. Some kind of drugs mimic dopamine, and we take them. Well, what's the effect? So we get excessively happy. We get excessively active. We are too happy. We are too active. So that's the effect of that kind of drug. So if the dopamine is released, we are happy, and we take the antagonist drugs. We're happy. What happened? We should be happy, but we are not happy. We are so calm, or we are so depressed, or we are sad, because it decreased the effect of that neurotransmitter. So that's how drugs can influence our physical body. And it's a chemical process. It directly influences the nervous system. So drugs for us are like bugs for softwares, for computer software. It's like bugs. All those bugs destroy the software, make the software not working well. But drugs also make us not working well. And some neurotransmitters are related to mental disorders. For example, for the people who have very severe depression symptoms, they have a very low serotonin level. So that is, depression is related to low serotonin level. Usually the level of serotonin in normal people's brain or in normal people's physical body is like this high. The people with depression, their serotonin level may be this high, much lower than the normal level. Their brain is not normal. Actually, they cannot. Their brain cannot work out to have more serotonin, so that's why they got depressed. So let's. So we have talked about the neurons, the basic building blocks of the nervous system. We have talked about neurotransmitters. We have talked about how the information is conveyed inside the neuron and between the neurons. So next part, we can talk about the nervous system itself. So nervous system consists of so many neurons, like more than 100 billion neurons. And the nervous system can be divided into many parts. So basically, nervous system can be divided into two parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. So peripheral means on the side. So peripheral nervous system means that part of the system is around the side of the central nervous system. So Yeah, you can see here, that's the central nervous system. Here, it consists of the brain on the head and the spinal cord. Spinal cord is a very long stripe in the nervous system. It's connects to the brain on the top, and also spinal cord connects to the peripheral nervous system because there are a lot of neurons everywhere inside our physical body, besides the brain, besides the spinal cord on the back. And the spinal cord is like a connection between the brain and other parts of the nervous system. So the spinal cord connects the brain and the peripheral nervous system. So why is designed or why it's why it evolved that way? There's a reason. So at the beginning, probably one animal or one insect or one kind of a creature only has a spinal cord. We can see there's for some fish and some like insects, they only have the spinal cords. They do not have a obvious brain. But we humans have a very large, big brain inside our physical body. Actually, brain is developed or evolved from the spinal cord. It's actually the top of the spinal cord. And the top of the spinal cord evolves into a brain. The brain is the center of information processing. So in the brain, the brain process all the information and give the reactions to every part of the physical body. So spinal cord actually convey the information up and down. So the peripheral nervous system is for receiving the information from every part of the body and send information to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord convey the information to the brain. So all those information is connected inside of the physical body, and the brain gets the information, gets sensory information specifically, and other kinds of information, gets the information, process it, think about it, and give some reactions. And they gave reactions, they gave the order to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord send the information to the peripheral nervous system so that peripheral nervous system can send the information to other parts of our body, for example, to the muscle or to the internal organ. So why we can move? Because we want to. So right now I'm moving my left hand. Why? Because my brain sends the signal, sends the information, sends the order to the spinal cord, and the spinal cord sends the information to the nerves, to the neurons in my left hand, and the neurons send the information to the muscles in my left hand. That's how it works. So the brain controls every part of our physical body, such as muscles, such as the different organs, internal organs, eyes, mouth, ears, and some internal organs such as stomachs, intestines, and so forth. So it gets information from all kinds of parts of the body to the brain, and the brain gives the order or gives the information to all kinds of parts of the body. So that's why it looks like this. There's a peripheral nervous system that connects all the other parts of the body, and the brain is the center of information processing. Spinal cords convey the information. And next, let's talk about the brain. So that's inside of the central nervous system. So you can see the brain is like this. So This is front. This is back. And this is down. And this is up. So you can see this is front, and this is back, and this is down. And on the surface of the brain, that's called the cerebral cortex. Cortex basically means like surface. Cortex is come from the Greek word, and basically means the surface. Cerebral cortex is the surface of the brain, and the cerebral cortex is the part where thinking happens, or all the information processing happens. So actually, brain relies on the surface of the brain. So actually, the surface of the brain is the most important part because the cerebral cortex processes all the information. And you can see on the surface of the brain it's not flat at all. It had a lot of folds, a lot of grooves. Why is that? Because we have a limited size of head, but the surface of the brain need to be very large. So it's like a folded inside of the head. So that's why there are folds and there are grooves. The folds are called the gyri. What patterns of the folds are called the gyri. And the grooves are called sulci. The singular form is sulcus. So sulci is the plural form. Gyri is also plural forms. The singular form is gyrus. So gyrus is a single gyri. So gyri are a lot of folds. Sulci are a lot of grooves, and sulcus is one groove. A lot of grooves in folds. And also the whole brain is divided into two halves, two parts, two hemispheres. It's called two hemispheres. And on the left and on the right. And between the two hemispheres, there is a very huge groove. It's called a longitudinal fissure or longitudinal fissure. That is a very huge groove between the two hemispheres. So that's why we can tell, oh, there are two halves of one brain. And two halves have different roles. This phenomenon is called lateralization. So each side has different strengths or different functions, have different roles. For example, math, if we are doing math questions, our left hemisphere is working. Our right hemisphere is almost not working. So all the logical reasoning, all the mathematical calculation is happening inside of the left hemisphere. So because the left hemisphere is responsible for math, for logic, for reasoning, for analyzing, and so forth. The right hemisphere is responsible for feeling, for emotion, for like communication between two people, because it involves a lot of feelings and so forth. Also involves processing of musical information. So why we can understand music, why we can hear melody, because our right hemisphere is working. So left hemisphere cannot tell the melody. Left hemisphere only tell, oh, there's a sound. There's a series of sounds. But right hemisphere really help us to understand, oh, it's a melody, that's music, that's a song. You can tell, oh, what kind of song is it? And also right hemisphere help us to understand human emotions. So when we're talking to other people, oh, this guy is happy, oh, this guy is sad, this guy is jealous, this guy is afraid of something. How we can tell that? Because the right hemisphere is doing that job, but the left hemisphere cannot. Left hemisphere just the left hemisphere just tell, oh, this guy, there's a guy, and this guy's face is moving, this guy is talking, but left hemisphere cannot tell whether this guy has all those kind of emotions or feelings. So that's called lateralization. So different hemispheres of the brain are specialized for different things. And the two hemispheres are actually interconnected. There's a huge longitudinal fissure that divides them, but also there's a part that they are connected. It's called a corpus callosum. It's a very thick bundle of neuron fibers. A lot of neurons are connected. They're actually connected. It's called a corpus callosum. Because they exchange information. The right and left hemisphere exchange information. And yeah, you can see here. From front, we can see the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and they're interconnected here. It's called a corpus callosum, but there is a fissure. There's a giant sulcus or the groove. From the side, we can see, oh, here is a corpus callosum. That's the parts that connect to hemispheres. From the top, we can see here is a corpus callosum. So now we have a basic understanding of the structure, overall structure of the brain. And the brain can be divided into different parts. And this part is called forebrain. The part of the brain that is on the top. So the biggest part of the brain is called forebrain. And inside the green part here is called the midbrain. And the part of the brain on the bottom is called the hindbrain. So the forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. So the forebrain is the part that is responsible for thinking and the feeling and the processing all the information. So why we are smart, why we are the most intelligent, because we have a very large forebrain. Forebrain is responsible for information processing. The midbrain has its own functions. The midbrain is basically responsible for creating some reactions to threats. Because in the environment, there are a lot of physical threats. We need to react to those physical threats. So when there is danger, there is a physical threat inside our environment, the midbrain is working. Midbrain creates alertness, creates alert to the brain. So the brain is so active, and the brain needs to work on to how to escape the danger, how to handle with the physical threat, and so forth. So midbrain is actually basically for creating the alertness. That's really important for human survival. And also maybe there are some other functions in the midbrains, but we do not have to know about that part. And inside of the hindbrain, the yellow part, you can see there are a lot of stuff. You can see this part of the hindbrain is called a pons, P-O-N-S. And this long part is called a medulla. It connects the spinal cord. You can see that the spinal cord is on the bottom of the brain. So actually brain connects the spinal cord through the medulla in the hindbrain. And this part is called cerebellum. And these three parts have different roles. The medulla, the long parts here, is actually responsible for controlling a lot of involuntary activities, such as breathing, such as heartbeat, such as walking sometimes. So it's responsible for a lot of very basic but involuntary activities inside of our physical body. Sometimes we cannot control some kind of activities, such as contraction of the stomachs, or the speed of the heartbeat, or even breathing. Sometimes we do. Most of the time, we do not intentionally control breathing. If we want, we can, but sometimes we do not consciously, intentionally control breathing, but we can still breathe without any intention, because the medulla is controlling it all the time. So medulla is very important because it controls a lot of very basic activities that is outside of our intention, outside our consciousness, but it supports the survival of the physical body. And also sometimes if this part, medulla, of somebody is hit or attacked, this person may die because the medulla part is hurt and cannot control the heartbeat. When the heart is stopped beating, the person dies. So be careful. This part is like on the back of the neck, is like this part on the back of the neck, your neck. So this part must be protected well. So even though other parts of the body cannot be attacked, but this part must be protected well. And let's talk about cerebellum. That's basically, it basically controls the balance, the body balance, or the motor activities. It controls a lot of the activities in the body balance. So when you are moving, when you are doing some sports, cerebellum is very important because it controls body balance and some motor activities, and also responsible for some kind of memory that is involved in moving, involving some like motor skills. So that's cerebellum. If somebody's cerebellum is hurt or attacked, they cannot maintain the balance. Somebody is on the back of the head. If suddenly the back of the head is hit very hard, probably this person cannot stand well because the cerebellum is hurt very severely. And next we can talk about the forebrain in detail. So midbrain, hindbrain, those are like the parts are not that important to know, but forebrain is very important for us to know about. And in the forebrain, there are also 4 parts. So you can see in the brain, there are 3 parts: forebrain, midbrain, and hindbrain. In the forebrain, there are 4 parts. It's called there are different 4 lobes. There is frontal lobe, there is parietal lobe, there's an occipital lobe, and there is a temporal lobe. So frontal lobe is in the front, this part, if you can see me well, like above the eyes, but on the front of the head. That's the frontal lobe, this part. And occipital lobe is on the back. It's right above the cerebellum, is on the back. And the parietal lobe is on the top. So between frontal lobe and occipital lobe, is on the top, and the temporal lobe is near the ears, on the bottom. So below the frontal, parietal, and occipital lobe, that is the temporal lobe, is above the ears but below the parietal lobe. There's a part of the cortex of the brain. It's called the temporal lobe. So let's know about the functions of each lobe. So each lobe has different roles. So actually the brain is very specialized. So every little tiny area of the cerebral cortex or the brain has its roles. So not only the two hemispheres have lateralization, have different specialized function, but every lobe of the brain has different functions. And I need to mention that every hemisphere of the brain has the four lobes. So it means there are two frontal lobes on the left and on the right. There are two parietal lobes, two occipital lobes, and two temporal lobes. So let's talk about frontal lobes first. Frontal lobes on the front. That's the most developed or most evolved part of the brain. That's the newest part of the brain in the history of human evolution. Why is that? Because it involves a lot of high-level cognitive functioning, such as the logical reasoning, logical analysis, doing mathematics. So everything about logic, about some abstract thinking, such as using the rules to play sports or using the abstract rules to play games, or doing some mathematical questions, doing some mathematical calculation. All these functions, all these jobs are done in the frontal lobe. And also it involves moral reasoning, involves somebody's morality. It involves the appropriate action, appropriateness in different social situations. That's what frontal lobes are doing. It involves a lot of abstract and high-level thinking. And also, frontal lobe involves motor control and language. And specifically, there are also different parts, like a prefrontal lobe cortex. It's like on the top. It's right here. That's the prefrontal cortex. Involves higher level cognitive functioning, as I just said, math calculation or logical reasoning, abstract thinking, understanding very abstract things, something like that. And there's a motor cortex. It's on the back here. You can see this is the motor cortex. It's very close to the parietal lobe. So motor cortex controls physical movement, can plan and coordinate movement. If you want to move, if you want to move your body, motor cortex is involved. So plan and send orders to the physical body, so if your physical body can move, such as move your tongue to talk, move your eyes to see different places, move your arms and legs to have different gestures. So motor cortex is responsible for that part. And also there is a part called inside of a frontal lobe. It's called Broca's area, because the person Broca founded the first, so it's called Broca's area. It produces language. Why we can speak? Because Broca's area creates language, so that's why we can speak. And Broca's area is close to motor cortex because to speak we need to move our mouth and tongues, right? So Broca's area produces the language and send the information to the motor cortex. So motor cortex send the information to the mouth so that we can talk. and also involves writing. So produce language. So what we want to write down. So 4 lobes of brain, write down. I want to write down that. So broadcast area produces that information and send it to the motor cortex. So motor cortex send the information to the right, to the right hand or left hand. So broadcast area produces language. Motor cortex produces movement, and prefrontal cortex involves all those kind of a very complex abstract thinking. So prefrontal cortex is also very important for us. We need to protect it because if this part is damaged, we cannot calculate, we cannot do math, we cannot involve in logical reasoning, and think very complex. So very complex thinking basically is done in the prefrontal cortex. And the next lobe is called the parietal lobe. Parietal lobe is behind the frontal lobe, and on the front of the occipital lobe is on the top of the head. Its role is like a relatively simple. It gets information from the body and process this sensory information. Basically, it processes the sensory information because the peripheral nervous system gets a lot of sensory information and send it to the brain. Specifically, send this sensory information, all these senses, to the parietal lobe. So parietal lobe integrate all this information and process this information. And there is a specific part inside of a parietal lobe. It's called a somatosensory cortex. This cortex processes sensory information. So I don't know if you remember just now, in the frontal lobe, there's motor cortex that is responsible for producing movement. And in the parietal lobe, there is somatosensory cortex that is responsible for receiving or processing sensory information. So the process is like is flipped, right? So motor cortex send information from the brain to the rest of the body, but somatosensory cortex gets the sensory information, gets the information from the rest of the body to the brain and process it. So what is sensory information? So all the things, all the information that you can get through the senses, such as from the eyes, you can see things. So every moment you see different things. Those are the visual information, that's one kind of sensory information. You can see things, you can see the pictures, you can see the movements and so forth. You can hear the sounds. All that's the auditory information. And you can touch things. You can feel the texture of different objects, right? So you can feel different things. And also your skin can feel the temperature and even humidity. So how humid, how wet the air is. Your skin can even feel that. And your skin can feel the temperature, how cold it is, and feel the different texture. And also your body can feel the balance. That's the role of cerebellum. Cerebellum can feel the balance and send the information to the parietal lobe. And probably there are other senses, but yeah, also the taste, the smell, the nose can feel the different kind of smells. The tongue in the mouth can feel different tastes. So all those are sensory information. All those sensory information are sent to the parietal lobe, so that you can know, or consciously know, oh, okay, what I see, what I hear, what I taste, what happened in the environment. So that's how you know everything. And also you can see on the left, there's a graph that shows the part of the somatosensory cortex. So you can see here's the cerebral cortex. And what does that mean? It means that it's actually a part of one hemisphere of the somatosensory cortex. So this is a half of the brain. So here is actually another part of the brain, like this shape. So here's a longitudinal fissure, and here's a corpus callosum. You can see on the cortex, on the surface of the brain, that's the cerebral cortex. There are very small, tiny parts, small, tiny areas that are responsible for the sensory information from different places of the physical body. For example, this part is fingers. It means that these parts of the cerebral cortex or the somatosensory cortex receive the sensory information from your fingers. So all the information from the fingers will not send information to other parts, but only send information to these tiny parts in the cerebral cortex. So this part is specialized for processing the information from the fingers. You can see its adjacent area. This is responsible for the sensory information from hands. And you can see some thumbs, like it has a specialized area just for thumbs. And for neck, for eyebrow and eyelids, for eyeballs, for face. Face has a larger area because face, yeah, you can feel have a lot of sensory information from the face. From the tongue, you can see a large area from responsible for the tongues. And also there are parts for swallowing, for chewing, for salivation. So it seems like eating is very important. So the brain allocate a lot of spaces for this kind of movements. And you can see here are for toes, for ankles, for knees, for hips, for shoulders, for elbows, and so forth. You can tell that there are large parts for hands and fingers and thumbs, and a less part for legs and arms, and for hips. And also a lot of parts for face, for lips, jaws, and for tongue, for this part, for the face, for the mouth. It has a reason. You can imagine that because fingers are very sensitive, because we need to use our hands to do a lot of things, because so that the senses on our fingers are very sensitive. We can feel very tiny things on our fingers and also in our mouth, because we need to eat things, so that the senses in the mouth and on the face are very sensitive, are very developed. So the brain allocated a lot of spaces to our faces, to our fingers and hands. But for toes or for knees, for hips, for shoulders, those parts are not that important. So that's very interesting. So that also explains why the senses on our fingers and hands are very sensitive, but on the senses on our back, legs, hip are not that sensitive. So that's the parietal lobe. And you can tell the information, sensory information about hearing and seeing is not in parietal lobe. So in parietal lobe is basically about the sensory information besides the eyes and the ears. let's talk about the temporal lobe. So the auditory information, sensory information, is processed in the temporal lobe. So temporal lobe involves hearing, language comprehension, emotion, and also part of memory. So there is a auditory cortex inside of the temporal lobe. That cortex is very close to our ears. That process auditory information and so process all the information that we hear. And also there is an area inside of temporal lobe. It's called the Wernicke's area. Here, Wernicke's area is responsible for understanding language and also understanding writing. So if we say some words, written words, how do we know their words? How do we understand? If we hear somebody talking, how do we understand? Wernicke's area is responsible for understanding language and written language. And auditory cortex is responsible for processing auditory hearing information. So this is broadcast area. So this is the frontal lobe, and this is the temporal lobe. So you can see Wernicke's area is inside of temporal lobe, and broadcast area, which is responsible for producing language, is in the frontal lobe. And last lobe is the occipital lobe. So it is for seeing, for visual information. So all the visual information, all the information that we see comes to the occipital lobe. So not in the parietal lobe, but in the occipital lobe. So all the whole occipital lobe is just for processing visual information. So you can see the entire lobe is for visual information, processing visual information and form perceptions and help us to understand what we see. And sometimes send information about the visual information to other lobes to do something or like help us to understand, to think. So you can imagine that there you can see on the picture on the right here. So here is the front, right? So here is the back. Occipital lobe is on the back of the head, but our eyes are on the front. So actually here is the eyes. So actually there is a bundle of neurons send information from the eyes to the occipital lobe. So there are a lot of neurons between the eyes and the occipital lobe. That's very interesting. The occipital lobe is very far away from the eyes. But for auditory information, the ears are very close to the temporal lobe, to the auditory cortex. So, and also you can see the entire lobe, occipital lobe, is responsible for visual information. Actually, our brain needs a lot of space to process visual information. So visual information is very important for us to function well. Much more important than auditory information and other kinds of sensory information. So that's the basic introduction of the 4 lobes of the forebrain. So hopefully we can remember every lobe's name and its functions. And then we can talk about the peripheral nervous system. So before talking about that, we need to know another concept. It's called nerve. It's not neuron. Nerve is composed of a lot of neurons. Nerve is like a bundle of thousands of neurons. So nerve is like aware. electrical wire. It looks like that, but it's not. Actually, through our eyes, nerve is like a bundle, it is like a wire. But it's actually composed of a lot of axons of neurons. So we can, we just said that the one neuron can be very, very long, longer than you can imagine. But it's very tiny. It has a super long axon. And all those neurons are together, when they are together and form a bundle, those axons are bundled together. They form the nerve. So you can see it on the picture on the right, each yellow line is actually a nerve. It's not a neuron, it's a nerve. Each nerve consists of thousands of neurons. So in the peripheral nervous system, all these nerves compose of the peripheral nervous system. Inside of the spinal cord, actually there are at least two nerves. Those two nerves are very, very thick because it's like a combination of all the neurons. But in the peripheral nervous system, each nerve is tinier, is not that thick. And in the peripheral nervous system can be divided into two parts. One is called somatic nervous system. The other is called automatic nervous system. Somatic nervous system is related to some voluntary activities or some activities that people consciously control. And in the somatic nervous system, there are neurons that are responsible for motor activities, and also the neurons that are responsible for receiving sensory information. So the motor neurons are responsible for sending the information from the motor cortex in the brain to the muscles. So that's why it's called motor neurons. Send the information from the brain to the muscles so that we can move. It involves in motor activities. The sensory neurons are actually the neurons that receive the sensory information from the rest of the body and send information to the brain, to the somatosensory cortex in the parietal lobe. So that's why it's called a sensory neuron. So you can see in the somatic nervous system, we know what we feel and we can voluntarily control how we move. So that's why it's called somatic nervous system. It's related to some voluntary activities. We can freely control our body because of the somatic nervous system. And also there is another part, it's called an automatic nervous system. It's automatic, means that it just automatically happens without our conscious control. So it's related to involuntary or unconscious activities. For example, sometimes breathing, and also heart beating, and also sometimes walking. Sometimes we just do not realize we are walking, but we are walking. I mean, like sometimes we are walking and we are doing other things, or we are thinking about other things. And at that moment, walking is involuntary. So automatic nervous system is involved for that. And oftentimes we need to keep the balance, right? So if we are going to fall down from the bed, if we are sleeping, we can suddenly wake up and maintain the balance and stop us from falling down to the ground. How is that possible? It's not voluntary. We do not know that at all. Who wakes up? Who wakes us up? Because of the automatic nervous system is doing that job, is maintaining the balance of the body. Yeah, and also control some kind of internal organs, such as digestion. We just swallow things. We just chewing and swallow things. And it automatically, the food just come down to the stomach, and the stomach digests the food, and the food come to the intestines and digest again. So all the whole entire digestion process is controlled by the automatic nervous system. It's totally involuntary. And also some control some glands. So glands secrete hormones. There are different hormones like sexual hormones and growth hormones and so forth. So so growth hormones make us to grow, physically grow. So we cannot control that process at all. So all those involuntary and unconscious activities are controlled by the automatic nervous system. So somatic nervous system just like something that we can control. And for automatic nervous system, there are also two parts inside of this system. One is called sympathetic nervous system, and the other is called parasympathetic nervous system. So sympathetic nervous system is activated or is useful when there is danger, or when there is some kind of activities or things that are really stressful. So that it activates the body to prepare for dealing with stresses or dealing with physical threats or physical danger. And the parasympathetic nervous system is doing another job, is activated when the body is relaxed, when there is no stress, when there is no threats, no danger outside of environment. So it is useful when we need to do some kind of routine operations, such as eating, such as sleeping, such as getting relaxed, sit down and get relaxed and watch TV and talk to other people when it's safe. So you can see those routine operations, routine activities need to be done when the environment is safe, when there is no stress, when there's no danger in the environment. So that's when parasympathetic nervous system is activated. So you can see that these two systems are doing different things, and they are like against each other. So when you are very activated to like fight with the danger, you cannot be relaxed, right? So you cannot do routine operations. When you are doing routine operations, there's no danger, there's no stress. Yeah, so the sympathetic nervous system is activated when there is threat. So they need to face the threat or handle the danger or handle the threat. The body needs to get more energy, and the sensory capacity must be heightened because we need to handle that situation. So when the sympathetic nervous system is highly activated, there is a phenomenon occurring inside of our body. It's called a fight or flight response. We'll talk about that in detail in a later chapter that is about stress. Because when we are stressful, when we feel stress, there is fight or flight response inside our body. So everyone must have had that feeling before. When suddenly there's some kind of thing that is very dangerous, or something that is very stressful, you feel very, very, very stressed. And that is the activation of fight or flight response. That is useful to handle the threat or escape from the threat. So fight means handle the threat. Flight means escaping or running away from the threat. So it asks the body to have a quick decision, quick judgment, either fight or flight, either run away or handle it. It helps us help the people to deal with the dangerous physical environment. So when the human society is not developed before, like thousands of years ago, the original people need to have that, because when they go out and hunt for food, they might meet a lot of dangerous animals, such as tigers, such as lions, such as wolves. And they might meet a lot of natural disasters, such as earthquakes, such as floods, such as rainstorms, something like that. They might meet a lot of physical threats, a lot of dangerous stuff in the physical environment. So at every moment they're in that situation, they need to have a quick decision, either fight with that danger or run away. So when they decide to fight, either fight or run away, they need to get their physical body, to get prepared. How to prepare? Have more forces in the muscles. Run faster. It means that you need to have a more intense breathing, breathe faster, and heart beating is faster. And also the sensory senses must be more sensitive. You need to see more things, you need to hear more things, right? So that's the role of sympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic nervous system help us to survive from the physical threat. So you can see the picture on the right. So it tells us what the sympathetic nervous system do to the body on the right. For example, dilate the pupil so that we can see more things. Our visual ability is higher, and inhibit the salivation, because salivation is not useful when facing the threat, and increases the heart rate, help us to either fight with the threat or run faster. And also inhibits digestion, because digestion is not useful when facing the threat. Inhibits the contraction of the bladder, so that when we fight or flight, we do not have to go to the bathroom. But on the contrary, for the parasympathetic nervous system, you can see that it stimulates salivation, slows the heart rate. So because we are doing some kind of relaxed activities, we do not have to get prepared for fight. Yeah, so that's the work of sympathetic nervous system and parasympathetic nervous system. So let's have a little bit summary here about the nervous system. So nervous system can be divided into two parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. In the central nervous system, it's like all the the place that process all the information. So there's brain and there's spinal cord. And for the peripheral nervous system, it's like a nervous system around the central nervous system. There is a somatic nervous system, and there is an automatic nervous system. So somatic nervous system is responsible for voluntary activities, and automatic nervous system is responsible for involuntary, some activities that we cannot control. So inside of the automatic nervous system, there is a sympathetic nervous system. There is parasympathetic nervous system. We have just talked about those two. So you can like memorize all these names using this chart, so it helps us to organize the knowledge. And let's go to another part in our lecture, endocrine system. So all we just talk about is about the nervous system. So that's one system that is very, that's the very basis for psychology. But endocrine system is another system in our physical body that is also very important to understand psychology. So nervous system consists of all kinds of neurons, right? Their brains, their spinal cords, their nerves, and they are all consist of neurons. They're processing the information. And endocrine system consists of a lot of glands. And the glands, what do glands do? Glands produce chemicals or hormones into the bloodstream. The endocrine system is also useful to adjust the body, to change the state of the body so that the body can prepare well for survival, for functioning, but through a different way. So the glands produce a lot of chemicals, or it's called hormones. Hormones will be released into bloodstreams, into the blood. So hormones travel through the blood. So you can see hormones as the carriers of information. The endocrine system also send the information to the rest of the body, but using a different way. It send the home chemicals, actual hormones, chemicals into the blood. In the blood, you can see blood vessels are everywhere inside the body. So the hormones can go everywhere inside our body. So for the nervous system, the information is conveyed in the neurons. For the endocrine system, the hormones travel through the blood vessels. We can see a very brief graph of the endocrine system. We can see different glands. You can see thyroid, adrenal glands, pancreas, uterus, ovaries, testes. And also here inside our brain, actually specifically, that's the midbrain. If you remember still. This is the midbrain. So actually, endocrine system and nervous system are like very closely connected. Sometimes you cannot tell exactly where the boundary is. But you can say the midbrain, in the midbrain, there is a thing called thalamus. That's actually a part of the nervous system, but it's also a part of endocrine system. And under the thalamus, there is a gland. It's called a pituitary gland. Pituitary gland. Thalamus and the pituitary gland are both in the midbrain, inside of the brain. And also there's pineal gland inside of midbrain as well. So there are actually a lot of other glands as well. There are more than 20 glands inside our body. And they have different functions, different roles. For example, the thalamus or hypothalamus, they're in the same place. Hypothalamus or thalamus in the brain controls the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland is very important, the most important gland inside of the endocrine system. That's the gland controls all other glands. So it's called a master gland. So it's a gland that controls all other glands. Without pituitary gland, all other glands cannot work well. Why? Because pituitary gland send the hormones to other glands. Send the hormones called messenger hormones. So the hormones are specialized, like a special type of hormones from the pituitary gland because it's called messenger hormones. For all other glands, the hormones from those glands send to some organs or muscles or other parts of the body, but pituitary gland only send the hormones to other glands. It doesn't send the hormones to other parts of the body. So that's why pituitary gland is called master gland. And the thalamus or hypothalamus controls the brain, controls the pituitary gland. And hypothalamus or thalamus is a part of the brain. What does that imply? It implies that brain controls thalamus, thalamus controls pituitary gland. Pituitary gland controls the whole endocrine system. It means that nervous system controls the endocrine system. The relation is like this: brain and controls the thalamus. And then thalamus is like a connection or bridge between the nervous system and the endocrine system, because it's both a part of the brain and a part of the endocrine system. And pituitary gland and all other glands. That is a pathway of control, pathway of how they are controlled or how they control others. So that pituitary gland is very important. We need to know what it is. And there are some other glands that I just pick some of them to talk about. The thyroid gland is like inside of the throat, regulates growth, metabolism, and appetite. So why boys and girls can grow? Because of the thyroid gland. It secrete the release the growth hormones so that the physical body can grow. And adrenal gland. Adrenal gland is above the liver, I think. Yeah, adrenal glands are above the liver. There are two adrenal glands above the two livers separately. The secrete hormones related to stress. So when we are stressful, adrenal glands will release a lot of the hormones into our body. So that's how the body can be changed. The state of the body can be changed. How the muscles can be changed. How the eyes can be changed. How the internal organs can be changed when we are stressful. So because adrenal glands secrete hormones, stress hormones to those different parts of the body so that we can feel the stress. And also there's a pancreas gland. Pancreas is also a internal organ, but it's also a gland. Pancreas gland regulates the body sugar levels. So for those who have diabetes, their pancreas gland have some kind of problems. Their pancreas glands cannot regulate blood sugar levels very well. So do not function well. So pancreas gland is about the sugar level in the blood. And ovaries are for female, and the testes are for male. It's in the sexual organs. Ovaries secrete the sexual, like feminine sexual hormones, and testes secrete the masculine sexual hormones. So that's why females are females and males are males, right? Because males have testes and females have ovaries. Inside of a man's body, a man has testes. There are much more male sexual hormones than the female sexual hormones. But for a woman's body, because she has ovaries, there are much more female sexual hormones than the male sexual hormones. Actually, everybody has both female and male sexual hormones, but the amount is different between the man and the woman. And also, there are a lot of other glands that we are not going to cover in this class. So we just know this, and specifically, we need to know what pituitary gland is. And I think that's all the stuff. For today. So thank you very much to watch this video. And this week, it involves a lot of biological terms. There's a lot of very dry and hardcore knowledge to know about the nervous system and the endocrine system. But it's very meaningful because it helps us to understand how exactly we think, how we exactly feel and do things. And that's the basis of psychology. And thank you very much. And next week, please read the chapter 4. And by the end of this week, please do the quiz for this week. And see you next week.